I call the meeting to order.
Okay. This meeting is being held as an electronic meeting pursuant to and in compliance with the City of Richmond Ordinance 2020-093 and the school board's resolution approved on April 20th, 2020. No, we're not having translation, I'm sorry. The notice of the meeting stated that the meeting would be a virtual meeting and would be live streamed on the school division's Facebook page. The public could see it there. The link was provided. And the agenda for the meeting was also posted to the RPS board doc site.
Okay.
Okay, so your roll call. Mrs. Page? Did I see Ms. Page?
She's not here.
Okay, she's coming. Mr. Barlow?
Here.
Ms. Gibson?
Here.
And Ms. Dorr?
Here.
We have a quorum, Madam Chair. The next item on the agenda is to adopt your agenda. I did not receive any requests to add or delete anything. You just need to adopt it as presented unless there's something to add.
Can I get a, go ahead, Mr. Parker.
Angie, I did want to add something, add the discussion regarding the audit committee.
Yep. I would agree with that. So can I get a motion to update or to approve the agenda as presented with the addition of a discussion about the external audit committee?
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
Okay. Was that you, Ms. Dorr?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Barlow?
Yes.
Ms. Gibson?
Yes.
Mrs. Dorr?
Yes.
Motion passes. Your agenda has been adopted as amended. The next item is to approve the minutes of your September 22nd meeting. Those minutes were sent out earlier and they have also been posted to board docs.
Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Is there a second? Did I miss it? Did I hear it?
Yes, I seconded it. Liz.
Thank you. Mr. Barlow?
Yes.
Ms. Gibson?
Yes.
Ms. Dorr?
Yes.
Final resolution, motion passes. The minutes have been approved. And so the next item is to discuss the proposed FY22 budget calendar.
Great. Mr. Parker?
One may have been us, unless, were you going over this, Milton? The calendar?
No, go ahead, Michelle. Go ahead. You got it. Go ahead.
We did receive it.
Yeah, that was going to be the only thing I was going to add is since it was received by the board, it's no longer necessarily a draft, but I'm happy to take any questions or if any folks have comments or other thoughts on the budget engagement process. I'm happy to do that, but this was a bit of a carryover, I think, from the last meeting too.
Any additional, we had a fairly robust conversation about this at the school board meeting. Any other comments on this? Okay, next item.
Thank you.
To receive the FY20 year-end student activity fund audit.
This is also something that we have received as a board. Are there any, Mr. Parker, what do you need, if anything, from the board in terms of next steps on this?
So what you guys have received were the actual turnover audits. You have not received the year-end audit, which encompasses, I believe, 1.5 million in funds from the student activity fund. So this is actually a newer report
Okay, great.
that has not been presented to the board just yet. I'm gonna share it, and then we can and Tanya will present it.
Perfect.
Share mine. Get it in a minute. So it's a couple documents here. This first one. All right, can everybody see that?
Yep.
All
Yes.
right, good. So basically what you have here is the student activity fund, the actual year-end student activity fund for FY20. Overall, this is the year-ended funds again for as of June 30th. We conducted a basic review of the financial statements pertaining to the student activity fund. The fund itself is actually the statements below pages 2 and 3, as you'll see, is a balance from every school. Balance as of July 1st, all the way through, should be 2019, so we need to change that, I'm sorry. So July 1st, 2019 through June 30th for June 20th, or June 2020, I'm sorry. And this is your receipts and disbursement statement. This is prepared by finance. All we do is go through and we test basically receipts and disbursements on a sample basis to make sure everything tests out. There are no material weaknesses there to the point that it changes the balances that are reported. This year we didn't find any of that. However, we did have some observations noted that will be presented by Ms. Holloway. So I'm going to share the next document, which is the actual audit document itself with all of the occurrences and observations. Give me a second. All right. Can you all see this document as well?
No, it's not on the screen.
I can just see the totals and the balance.
All right, hold on. Screen share.
And for the purposes of anyone that is watching along in the public, can you give a brief overview of the student activity funds and the purpose of this audit?
Okay.
The student activity funds are basically funds that are submitted are collected through the school for activities. There may be also donations, fundraisers, things of that nature. And the monies that are collected are used for the entire student body. Basically, this particular audit goes from July 1st of 2019 through June 30 of 2020. So we looked at the entire year of the 47 schools to, see if there was any material misstatements or if there are any occurrences or observations within. So when we looked at the student activity funds, we're looking at things such as fees, dues, athletic gate receipts, donations, fundraisers, grants, PTA, as well as PTO support. So we noted that so this memorandum summarizes the observations noted at the schools that were in conflict with Richmond Public Schools policies, procedures, and/or best practices. Each principal received a memorandum for his or her individual school of the audit results. Out of 47 schools audited, there were a total of 226 observations. There were 2 of 47 schools with no exceptions or observations, and that's G.H. Reed Elementary School and Richmond Alternative School. The things that were examined during the Student Activity Fund year-end audit, we looked at cash receipts, which were controls and safeguards over cash receipts, timeliness of deposits, bank reconciliations for completeness, accuracy, and timeliness. Funds were collected, counted, and receipted daily. Funds are counted in the presence of a second counter, and that's to verify the accuracy of the count. We looked at check disbursements, controls and safeguards over cash disbursements, Purchases are made in accordance with policies, procedures, and guidelines. Check registers reviewed, investigated, and resolved prior to checks becoming 180 days outstanding. Expenditure authorizations were properly signed and dated by the principal. Timely submission of supporting documentation. The next area is accounting procedures. School safes to ensure they were securely located, properly locked, and access properly restricted. We looked at deficit and inactive accounts for appropriateness, timely submission of fees and fines, fund transfers between activity accounts, and activity accounts as to the purpose, source, and the use of those funds. Other areas that we reviewed were timely submission of audit documents, the representation letter, the questionnaire, and FY 19-20 audit results memorandum. Questionnaire, the review of controls and safeguards over cash receipts and disbursements. Below, you will see in the table the observations that were noted. For cash receipts, untimely deposits, deposits not made timely, deposits not entered into EPS timely, untimely receipts, funds not properly collected, counted, and receipted in the absence of the finance officer, accuracy of funds collected, funds not counted in the presence of a second counter, bank reconciliation. Bank reconciliations were not completed timely. There were date discrepancies, inaccurate date printed by principal, date typed on reconciliation and not printed by principal to show evidence of a review and timely approval. Below the graph that you see, in the orange portion, that'll show you the number of schools with observations, and the blue portion of the graph shows you the number of schools without observations for each one of the topics under cash receipts that we just discussed. Go ahead down to cash disbursements. Thank you. Again, this is a table for cash disbursements, the observations that were noted. Outstanding checks, checks were greater than 180 days were not cleared. Inappropriate expenditure authorizations, rubber stamps were used for approval of expenditures. Untimely submission of supporting documentation, non-compliance with the audit department's request to provide copies of gift card documentation by date specified. Again, the graph shows you just the schools with the observations and without observations based on the topics that were discussed under check disbursements. And then accounting procedures. The observations noted were safeguarding resources. There was no safe or inoperable safes. Deficit accounts, activity fund accounts held deficit balances at year end. Inactive accounts, activity fund accounts with no activity for 1 year or more. Untimely submission of fees and fines and fees not submitted to the finance department by June 30th, 2020. Fund transfers, there were inappropriate transfers between activity fund accounts. And that basically means that, you know, there were transfers that were made into accounts that should not have been, those transfers should not have been made into those fund accounts. Student activity account discrepancies, monies was being held for the PTA or PTO, monies being held from the collection of staff, inappropriate use of activity funds for staff expenditures, monies deposited into the incorrect activity fund account, and a surplus of funds in activity fund accounts. And again, this just showed, the graph just shows the number of schools with observations and the number of schools without observations. As you can see in accounting procedures, that is the area where we have the most discrepancies in the accounting procedure area. And then other areas. The observations noted here were untimely submission of audit representation letter, and that representation letter was not submitted to the audit department by the date specified. The representation letter is used just for the principals to say that they're aware of everything that's going on in their schools. There's no material misstatement in all of the documentation that we receive from them. untimely submission of audit questionnaire. The questionnaire was not submitted to the audit department by the date specified. And the questionnaire just basically is a survey to find out from the schools what their best practices are. Untimely submission of FY 19-20 audit results memorandum. And again, the memorandum was not submitted to the audit department by the date specified. And the memorandum is just basically the principals had to sign and date on as to recognition of their audit observations. Questionnaire discrepancies, we noted inadequate controls and safeguards over cash receipts and cash disbursements. And the audit representation letter discrepancies, representation letter was not signed and or dated by the principal. And again, the table below, the graph below indicates the number of schools with the observation and the number of schools without the observation based on the observation headings that were listed in the chart. Is there any questions for me at this time?
I'm sure there will be. I have a few, but I'll turn it to my colleagues first.
I don't have any questions. I thought that was really helpful.
Great. Any other questions from the group?
Nothing too specific. I know that anytime we see these types of results or schools with observations, the question keeps popping up about training. And I know that the board will continue to receive updates on how that's going, and that there's collaboration between the auditing team and the finance team to make sure that our school staff is prepared to handle these funds appropriately.
So if I may, because this report is subsequent to this report, I should say, we've conducted, or we've worked with finance, and Wanda probably can chime in a little bit better on the finance end. There have been quite a few trainings from the student activity fund perspective. I know we conducted the training or facilitated the training with the principals, where a lot of questions were asked. There was a lot of understanding, as well as when it comes to the accounting procedures. You heard about the safes. I would believe, and Mr. Desko can correct me if I'm wrong, they're currently in the process of buying safes at those schools and purchasing safes where the safes are inoperable, and trying to fix those safes where safes are operable, but maybe they need a code change or something like that. So they're making they're doing their diligence to try and correct a lot of the problems right now, especially since we can get it done prior to the kids coming back to school in most instances.
Yes, every building will have a working safe before they leave by winter break. I think we're down to just a couple. So that was a commitment by the administration to make sure that finding was fully resolved.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that Ms. Page has joined the meeting. So Ms. Page, do you have any questions? I have a couple of questions, but I'll let you go first if you have anything to say. Okay. So for just a couple of quick questions, and I do think it would be helpful maybe at our meeting in January to get an update on training, kind of if there's any other just sort of an ongoing agenda item around training, because I think that's a real value add that you all are bringing to the table. For four quick questions. So what is, if there's no activity in the activity funds for a full year, what is that? Can you help interpret that? Does that mean that there's just no money that's been collected for activity funds, or is it just not reported? And then there are some pretty big surpluses at some schools, and there are some with negative account balances. So I was wondering if you could just speak to that, and kind of what is best practice as it relates to surplus, and what happens if the account is overdrawn. And then can you, and just a question for me, one of the findings was monies being held for PTA. So I was just wondering if you could illuminate on that a little bit.
So your first question was about,
No activity in the account.
so for the no activity in the account for 1 year or more means that there's no receipts or disbursements out of the account. So money is just sitting in the account and no one's, the school is not using it for the purpose in which that money was collected. So that's basically what the inactivity of those accounts consist of. As far as the deficit accounts, that means that the accounts were overspent. Maybe I can't really speculate. This goes more for the finance officers to basically explain, but, maybe they thought that they would perhaps be able to collect money to offset those accounts so that they wouldn't be deficit. But however, the accounts have come up deficit with no money to basically replenish the account. As far as the surplus, we're noticing that a lot of those accounts, the money was either raised through a fundraiser or through donations. And so we don't have documentation to show what the purpose of those accounts were supposed to be used for. So most of the time, those accounts will go into an inactive status, which means that if they have no documentation, if the new principal comes or a finance officer comes, they don't really know why that money is in that account. And me interviewing the principals as well as the finance officers, that was mostly what their indication was. They don't know what, it was collected prior to them coming. So the money is sitting in the account. So basically what I tell them is to transfer the money into the general fund. That way the entire student body, because you have no documentation to show that, say, a donation account was supposed to be used to purchase school supplies or whatever the case may be. With that being said, if you put it into the general fund account, the entire student body will be able to use that money for those purposes. When speaking on your last question, can you tell me what that one was again?
PTAs and PTOs.
Oh, the PTAs and PTOs. Under no circumstances are the schools supposed to be holding money in the student activity fund for that, for those organizations at all. And we've noticed that when the PTA or PTO dismantles, in a few of the schools, they're holding the money in the student activity funds, because they're under the impression that the PTA or PTO will reconvene. They're not supposed to be holding the money at all. The only time that PTA or PTO money is to be held in a student activity fund account is if that money is donated to the school from the PTA or PTO, say to buy playground equipment. So that's the only time that money should be held in those accounts. Under no circumstances should they just be holding money in hopes that the PTA or PTO will start up again.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. So does this satisfy our requirement?
You're welcome.
I believe this is a requirement via state code to audit these accounts on an annual basis. Do you need it? I certainly would like my colleagues on the board to have access to this, so maybe we can put this in other informational items at the next board meeting. Is there anything else that you will need from us?
As far as student activity funds go, so we are in a conversation, and Wanda, please chime in. We've been in conversation with finance regarding the surplus or the inactive funds where there's been more than a year's worth of activity for the donations. We're right now doing some research, and I know we're going to bring it up at some point where we'll need a recommendation from the board as to what is the directive at which the money can be spent and which the money can be, quote unquote, those accounts can be dissolved. To Tanya's point, what she was saying about the inactive accounts, some of the principals inherit accounts that come back from 2010, and they have no documentation what to do with it. So essentially the money will just keep rolling over and rolling over and rolling over. whereas it'll never be used, even if it's $50. You know what I mean? And so we'll need some overarching guidance and approval from the board saying that money at a certain extent or for over a certain amount of time can be cashed in and then used accordingly at, whatever that may be. You're talking on mute.
Let's go ahead and make sure that this is an agenda item in January to
Okay.
check back in on training and the issue with surplus funds or inactive accounts.
Okay.
Ms. Dorr,
Yes,
this is Wanda.
Hi.
So, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
So we've already had one training with all of the finance officers and a follow-up with those who couldn't attend the first one. We've also had training for the activity directors. So we're at the point now where we have drafted a survey and we are requesting some feedback on the initial training. And we've had 1 or 2 people reach out that didn't feel like the training was, I don't know how to put it, but they didn't like it virtually. Bottom line, they didn't like virtual training. It was a lot more people. Normally we break it up into more sessions and we had it, because it was virtual, we had it for everyone. So we've had maybe 2 people request one-on-ones, which we are currently setting up. We'll probably do them the first of the year.
Okay. Well, that's thanks also for the update on training and also for collecting the feedback. That's really helpful. And like, do we give a congratulations for, was it GH Reed and Richmond Alternative School for having 0
Yes.
issues? I mean,
Yes.
can we like give them a little certificate or something? Yeah, a recognition. Well, okay, fantastic. If there's no more other questions, let's move on to the next agenda item.
Sure. So our next agenda item we added in was the discussion around the external audit committee. I know we, let me share my screen. And I'm going to stop at this slide right here. Come on. Okay, there we go. So I know we talked about an external audit committee. I brought this before the board at the last 2 school board meetings ago, I believe. And so I know we wanted to kind of talk about going into forming an external or an audit committee overall. And so when we make this change, I kind of wanted to get some input from you all regarding, or some thoughts about how we really wanted to do this. I know there's been some discussion about, we want some community members. I know I'm suggesting 3 to 5 people, no more than 5. However, the city's current setup downstairs, they actually have 7 people on theirs, which is that's a little much for what we're trying to do here, in my opinion. But I think 3 would be good, even if it's even if we reverse it in option 1 to be 2 board members and 3 community members. Or it needs to be 3 board members because we have to make votes and stuff at the audit committee level. And then discuss what is the purpose or what is the role of the audit committee, and how they will either, be the liaison for the board between the internal auditors and the board, or do we still report directly to the board with the internal audit committee as a dotted line? I mean, yeah, the audit committee is a dotted line.
So I recall, and feel free to chime in, Mr. Barlow, Ms. Gibson, that there was some feedback from the board, and this is all just from memory. So one that I'll speak for myself. I personally have concern about setting up another committee with sort of not a clear scope of what their roles are. I certainly think that it's valuable to have an external audit committee. So maybe you could talk about how the city council's audit committee works with the city's finance committee. I don't know if you know that. And I believe that there was also some feedback from board members about wanting to have more people, community members on the committee, and potentially have folks that both bring some expertise, industry expertise, but also community member voice, parent, teacher
Right.
voice to the committee, in addition to just accountants and finance people. So
Gotcha.
that's my recollection of some of the feedback. I'm having a hard time understanding how this idea fits in with our committee. Don't want to create a lot of extra work. So I would love your thoughts there, and I would love my colleagues' thoughts as well.
Okay. So if I could go first, quite naturally, everybody else around us have a separate audit committee, right? And in those audit committees, the purpose of the audit committee is pretty much to be the buffer between the board and the internal auditors. So when we have an audit committee meeting, that's when internal audit comes and they give all of the updates on the reporting, all the work that they're doing. Because again, if we're bringing forward, could be 3 or 4 reports in a session, that can be a whole lot of work. You know, that could extend the school board meeting itself a whole hour to talk about what were the issues from the audit, having the auditee in here. Let's say if it was facilities, you have facilities in here and they'll be talking about, well, here's how this thing really happened, if something were to happen, so forth and so on. And that would really be, you know, again, that would prolong things even that much longer than what it is now. However, when you talk about the relationship between the finance committee and the city, as well as the audit committee is absolutely separate from the finance committee. The budget and finance committee is what they call themselves. And so what you have is, again, that audit committee is there because they have to be, when you talk audit, it's always about independence and objectivity. And so that group sits over there kind of off to themselves, and they bring forward things that they want to see have happen from the internal auditors in the city. Likewise, in Chesterfield, where you have a budget and finance or audit, budget and finance committee, so the AFC, the audit and finance committee, they still do the same type things, but they kind of combine them both. Whereas in the city, you just have 2 separate committees. You would have an audit and finance committee, which was very similar to what was in place some years ago here, where they would talk about all things budget, audit, and finance. So when we come together, it would probably extend this meeting from an hour to 2 hours now when we report. And you would hear everything from finance perspective, budget perspective, and the audit committee's perspective.
And just a quick follow-up, in that audit, finance, and budget committee, that includes community members?
Yes.
Or, okay,
Yes.
got it. So that's what Chesterfield Public Schools does?
Yes, in Chesterfield, and I would have to confirm it for sure. I'm thinking off memory right now real quick, but they have community members in there. They're non-voting. They don't, you know, they're just there. They're like business people. The one issue, the pros is, yes, if you have a teacher and or a principal or somebody out of the schools, yes, it brings that voice. That's a pro. You bring that voice, you get to hear that side. Here's the other piece. It then kind of impairs our objectivity though, from an audit perspective, because now they're telling us what they want to have happen or what they think should have happen, while you would normally have an outside business person or a community person who has no stake in the game per se. That teacher could be the very subject of an audit, you know, or that department or that school or so forth and so on. So you would kind of steer away from having the teachers or the principals or people that are actually employed by the school systems, or employed by the school system on this committee per se.
So, Mr. Barlow, Ms. Gibson, do you all have a perspective on, certainly want to make sure that we're being respectful of what everyone on the board wants. But I think the options on the table right now are, do we keep this committee, finance and budget, or do we expand this committee to be finance, budget, and audit and include community members? Or do we keep this committee, finance and budget, and then have a separate audit committee? So I personally think it makes sense to expand this to finance, budget, and audit with a couple of community members. And I think the process for selecting the community members, we can, certainly there'll be, I assume, some kind of application or nomination. And, to the extent, I don't know if we need to solve who is the right person for that at this time. I think there's, you outlined some good pros and some considerations for committee members. But I'm just an opinion of one. Mr. Barlow or Ms. Gibson, do you all have a perspective?
Madam Chair, this is Kenya or Ms. Gibson. So I think that there's certainly plenty of work to have two separate committees. So, I mean, from an accounting standpoint, finance and audit are two separate functions. And so, I think as a committee, we have been, it's not a lot of time. We're meeting once a month. And so, it's an hour. And I think that we'd be well served to have an hour monthly that's dedicated simply to the audit work. And then another group that's focused on current financial activity. So my recommendation would be to have the two separate entities. And as it pertains to the size, I'm curious, whatever recommendation that the Council of Great City Schools made, I have some, I kind of defer to that expertise and in terms of the size.
All right, so two separate opinions. So I think, Mr. Barlow, if you have a perspective, but it seems to me like maybe we need to flesh this out one more time and bring it to the board for their full approval. Mr. Barlow, do you lean any way, or do you think we should just bring it to the larger body?
I see value to either approach. I kind of think I worry about overextending the board with a number of different committees. So I wonder if the same group could do an hour and then bring advisory members in for a second hour or something along those lines. Just because I think with the committee reporting processes and stuff that we see as a board, stuff can get lost in the shuffle. And the last thing I would want is for the audit committee to not be as effective as it could be. So I understand the distinction between the roles, but I do think that there's probably some value in having some of the same folks involved with both, because you are dealing with certain topics that do have overlap in the financial realm.
I share your perspective as well, Mr. Barlow, but I think, Ms. Gibson, you outlined some important considerations. So I don't love like the sort of constant talking about committees to talk about committees to talk about committees. So at some point we just need to make a decision and move forward. It's probably good to move forward in the start of the new year when we have our new board. But my recommendation would be, Mr. Parker, if you could maybe just flesh out that one slide that you just shared with us with some of the feedback from tonight. So the two options before the board would be one finance, budget, and audit committee that meets 2 hours a month and includes community members, and two separate committees. And then a perspective on the number of external committee members, looking to the Council on Great City Schools as a best practice, and some of the other research that you've done about what other school districts have done.
Okay.
And then let's set a goal of just making that decision, timely, so that we can finally move forward with whatever this committee will look like.
Right. Because I'm not to cut you off, I'm sorry, because I know Miss Lily will have to make some changes too.
Right.
You guys will have to get together and rewrite policies and all that kind of stuff, and charters as well. So
Yep. Okay. I have any other comments from this group? So Miss I don't know if, oh yeah, Mrs. Wilson and Ms. Hudasco, if you guys could just pass that along to the agenda setting, as part of the agenda setting meeting, that would be helpful, and figure out when's a good time to get it before the board so that we can give Mr. Milton some additional guidance. My other comment is that pause. Mr. Varler or Ms. Gibson, do you guys have any additional feedback? Did I capture your feedback correctly?
All set.
All
Great.
set.
So my last item of business is on our meeting in December. It's currently scheduled for December 22nd. Before everyone came on, Mr. Parker, we were talking about whether we should do one, 3 weeks into the December or punt it to next year. And it was Mr. Parker's recommendation that we meet in January when we have the new board in place. So with that, I would like to move that we cancel our December meeting and reconvene in January. Comments, feedback?
I'm fine with that.
Great. All right. Is there any other comments, concerns, things that we want to add to the docket for next time? Okay. All right. Well, then this meeting is adjourned.